into the stark reality of being poor, but it was well on its way. Park City's housewives, many of them in their 40s and for years accustomed to nothing more thought-provoking than ringing for the butler, were for the first time in their lives learning to job hunt, cook, and run the washing machine. The war drums that rolled through the Persian Gulf stirred faint hope in the breasts of devastated oilmen. That very morning, crude rose a whopping $2 a barrel. The excitement was to be short-lived, the fluttery recovery in oil prices as brief as Desert Storm itself. By mid-year, many of the oil guys would be relearning the business from the ground up, pouring the black stuff into the crankcases of paying customers and standing in line for a meager check at the end of the week. The 8th of January was a Tuesday. The Giants, Bears, Redskins, and 49ers received modest local coverage as they prepared to square off on opposite coasts in the second round of the NFL playoffs. Since the Cowboys had seemed a certain playoff team, with 2 games left in the season, and then had blown the opportunity, most of Dallas couldn't have cared less what ball club made it to the Super Bowl. An event of greater local interest than professional football occurred around 1 in the afternoon on that fateful Tuesday, in the far North Dallas suburb of Richardson, when a troubled teenager placed the barrel of a .357 Magnum against his forehead and pulled the trigger before 30 stunned classmates. The year 1991 was to bring, by a whopping number of inches, the greatest annual rainfall in the history of the area. But as of January 8th, the first drop of the infant year had yet to fall. The forecast called for cool to cold and partly cloudy with no chance of rain until Thursday, but experienced Dallasites had learned to rely in predicting the weather equally on meteorologists and on the state of the rheumatism in Grandma's ankle. And in fact, as darkness fell over the city, cloud banks gathered and faint thunder rolled. By 11, as most of the residents packed off to bed, a cold mist drifted down to wet the rooftops and encircle the streetlights with damp and eerie halos. Dallas kept a watchful eye on the thermometer. A drop of a couple of degrees would coat the roads with ice. Luckily for nighttime travelers, the temperature sank to 33 and went no lower. Around midnight, in the western half of a Park City's duplex located a block from Southern Methodist University, a young man named Richard Lyon prepared to take his stricken wife, Nancy, to the hospital. She'd had cramps, diarrhea, and fits of violent nausea since early afternoon, and the prescriptions that her doctor had phoned in to the nearby Eckert's pharmacy weren't helping. Richard arose from the down mattress in the upstairs bedroom and dressed himself. He checked on his daughters, ages 2 and 4, who slept across the hall in the nursery. He then carried his remote intercom receiver, which he used to monitor the sleep noises made by the little girls downstairs and out onto the porch. There he stood in the icy drizzle and rang the bell to waken his next-door neighbor. After a few moments, Gail Golden cracked open the door and peered outside. She was a petite and comely young freelance writer who, along with her husband, Chris Worthington, a Dallas Morning News sports editor, were Richard's tenants in the duplex. While in many neighborhoods, a midnight knock on the door is something to fear, this was Park City's. Gail smiled a greeting and said hello. Richard explained his problem quickly. He didn't think that anything truly serious was wrong with his wife, but one couldn't be too careful these days with the flu going around, and asked if Gail could keep the remote receiver by her bed in case the girls cried out while Richard and Nancy were gone. Nancy hadn't been really well of late, so her illness wasn't all that surprising. Gail eagerly agreed to help and murmured sleepy concern over Nancy's well-being. His daughter's safety assured, Richard returned to his bedroom and wrapped Nancy in a blanket. Though a short man, he was quite strong, and he carried his wife downstairs with little effort. On the way, he passed framed photos that hung beside the landing. Richard and Nancy in wedding clothes beside a huge 3-tiered